A 90-pound Belgian Malinois with a kill record longer than most operators' careers was airborne, jaws wide, closing the last 6 feet between himself and a woman who hadn't even raised her hands. The men watching from the catwalk above the kennel block had taken bets on how fast she'd scream. None of them had money on what actually happened next, that the dog they'd spent 3 weeks calling a write-off would hit the dirt mid-leap, like he'd run into a wall of glass. The training compound at CFB Suffield sat under a flat grey Alberta sky, the kind that made everything look colder than the thermometer claimed. Wind cut low across the gravel yard, rattling the chain link and carrying the smell of diesel and wet dog fur. This was where Joint Task Force 2 ran its hardest cycles. Operators who didn't talk about what they did. Dogs that didn't bark unless someone told them to. Into this compound walked a woman nobody on Bravo section had ever seen before. She was maybe 5'5", dressed in plain grey fleece and tactical pants that looked more practical than military. Her dark hair tied back in a low knot that had clearly been done in a hurry. She carried a battered field notebook under one arm and a canvas bag over her shoulder, and she moved through the compound gate like she had every right to be there, which, on paper, she did not. To Master Corporal Liam Brecker, watching from the equipment shed, with a mug of bad coffee going cold in his hand, she looked like exactly what she wasn't supposed to be. Some welfare officer sent up from Edmonton to write a report on dog handling procedures. Nobody asked for. He wasn't alone in that assumption. Bravo section had a way of sizing people up in under 5 seconds, and most of the time they weren't wrong. This time, they were about to be spectacularly wrong, but nobody in that yard had the first idea yet. In the center of the training enclosure, the scene was already a mess. Dust hung thick in the air, kicked loose by paws scrabbling against hard-packed earth, and the sound coming off the dog inside the cage wasn't anything close to a trained bark. It was lower than that roar, the kind of sound that made the hair go up on the back of your neck, even from 30 feet away. Sergeant Wade Tully had his weight braced against the gate, sweat-cutting tracks through the dust on his face. Inside the enclosure, Corporal Ray Doiron was scrambling backward across the dirt, one arm wrapped in a padded bite sleeve that hadn't done him much good. The dog had gone past the sleeve entirely and locked onto the meat of his shoulder through the training jacket. "Get him off! Somebody get him off me!" Doiron shouted, boots kicking up dirt as he tried to roll away. Another operator, a broad-shouldered corporal named Dale Whitfield, came in fast with a brake stick, prying at the dog's jaw. It took him and Tully both, working together, almost 2 full minutes to peel the animal loose. When they finally got a tether clipped to his harness and hauled him back, the dog kept lunging against the chain anyway, barking with a fury that left foam at the corners of his mouth, his eyes blown wide and black. There was nothing trained about what was happening in that cage. It was just rage, with nowhere to go. The woman stood at the fence with her fingers hooked loosely through the chain link, watching without expression. Not flinching, not stepping back, just watching, the way you'd study a machine that was malfunctioning, trying to find the part that had broken. Tully stepped out of the cage, slamming the gate behind him hard enough to rattle the whole frame. He stripped off his gloves and threw them onto the bench, breathing hard. "He's finished," Tully said to Whitfield, shaking his head. "3rd time this week he's gone off the rails. He won't take a verbal correction anymore, won't take the e-collar. He's a liability, plain and simple. We bring him on an op like this, he gets somebody killed or blows the whole entry." Whitfield nodded grimly. Ever since Marek went down, the dog's been wrong in the head. There's no fixing that. He needs to be put down before he hurts somebody who isn't wearing a sleeve. "Excuse me." The voice that cut through the yard was calm, level, almost too quiet for the space it was filling. Tully and Whitfield both turned. The woman had closed half the distance to them without either man noticing, her notebook tucked under one arm. Tully's eyes ran over her once, dismissive, already moving on. "Admin's back that way," he said. jerking a thumb toward the main road. "This is a restricted training area." "I know exactly where I am," she said, unbothered. "I'm here about the dog." Whitfield let out a short laugh. "You? Somebody actually sent a welfare officer up here for this?" She didn't react to it, just stepped closer to the fence, her eyes finding the dog still pacing hard at the end of his chain, dragging furrows into the dirt with every pass. "His name is Ghost," she said, and then caught herself, a flicker crossing her face, quickly buried. "His designation's KT7, 4 years old, 2 deployments, both classified." He pulled 3 operators out of a compound collapse in Helmand before his handler, Master Corporal Aaron Marek, was killed in the same incident. Tully crossed his arms. "So you can read a file. Doesn't tell you anything about what he's like now. He nearly took Doiron's arm off 10 minutes ago." "He's not broken," she said quietly, still watching the dog. "He's grieving, and you're handling him like he's a machine that needs resetting instead of an animal that lost the one person he trusted. Malinois like him don't run on force, Sergeant. They run on bond. You're trying to dominate him, and he doesn't respect that, so he fights it." Tully's jaw tightened, his pride bruising fast. He straightened to his full height, using it the way he always did, letting it loom over her. "I've been handling working dogs since before you finished university, lady. Don't come up here in your fleece jacket and tell me how to do my job. You think you know better? Fine, get in the cage and show us." It was meant as a dare, a way to embarrass her into leaving quietly. He had no intention of actually letting her near that animal, but he had no idea who he was talking to. She wasn't a welfare officer. She wasn't even attached to the base. Dr. Naomi Renauld held a position that didn't show up on any organizational chart Tully had ever seen. Lead behavioral geneticist for a Defense Research and Development Canada program so compartmentalized that most generals didn't know it existed. She didn't evaluate working dogs. She built them. Something shifted behind her eyes, faint enough that only someone watching closely would have caught it. "All right," she said simply, and set her bag down in the dirt. "Give me a sleeve." The yard went quiet. Whitfield and Tully traded a look. Doiron, still icing his shoulder on the bench, sat up straighter, wincing. "Sarge, hold on," Doiron said. "She's not wearing armor. He'll take her arm off." Tully hesitated, the weight of his own dare suddenly heavier than he'd intended. "Look, I was making a point. You don't have the clearance to step in there. I'm not signing anything until I do a hands-on evaluation," she said, already pulling a heavy bite sleeve from her bag and strapping it on. "You issued the challenge, Sergeant. I'm taking it." Whitfield shook his head, smirking despite himself. "She wants the hero treatment. Fine. Keep him tethered. First sign of trouble, we pull her right back out." Tully ground his teeth. 5 feet inside the gate. No sudden movement, no eye contact. If he comes at you, you drop the sleeve and back off. "I know the protocols," she said. She walked toward the gate. Inside, Ghost's head snapped toward the movement, ears pinning flat, the ridge of fur along his spine standing up straight. A low growl built in his chest, deep enough to feel through the ground. Whitfield cracked the gate just enough for her to slip through, then slammed it shut, leaning his weight against it. "All right," he muttered through the fence. "Let's see it." She stood just inside the wire. 40 feet away, Ghost dropped into a low stance, every muscle coiled, saliva stringing from his jaw. That was when Tully made the mistake that would haunt him for the rest of the night. Thinking she needed a real scare to send her packing, he reached for the release lever on the tether line. "Let's give her something real," he muttered to Whitfield, and pulled it. The carabiner snapped open. Ghost was loose. Doiron came off the bench, shouting, "Sarge, what the hell? He's not wearing the full sleeve. He'll go for her face." Tully's stomach dropped the instant he saw what he'd done. "Open the gate. Get her out now." Whitfield fumbled with the latch, hand slipping on cold metal. Ghost didn't hesitate. He came off the ground like something launched, paws tearing up dirt, closing 40 feet in a handful of seconds, ears back, teeth bared. She didn't run. She didn't even lift the sleeve to protect herself. Instead, with the dog 10 feet away and rising into the air, she reached over with her free hand and unbuckled the bite sleeve, letting it drop uselessly into the dirt at her feet. Unprotected, completely exposed. No, Doiron's voice cracked through the yard. Ghost was airborne, jaws wide, 3 feet out, and she didn't blink. She locked eyes with him and shouted a single word. Sharp, foreign, a sound none of the men in that yard had ever heard a handler use. A word that didn't belong to any standard command set on any Canadian base. Mid-air, something in the dog's eyes changed. Recognition, sudden and total. He hit the ground hard, 4 paws digging in, skidding through the dust in a spray that swallowed them both whole. Outside the fence, Tully and Whitfield froze, hands locked on the chain link, braced for screaming, for blood. The dust began to settle. She was still standing untouched. At her feet, the animal that had just torn a hole through Doiron's shoulder 10 minutes earlier was pressed flat against the ground in a perfect, rigid down, his chin resting against the toe of her boot, his whole body trembling. Not with aggression, but with something closer to disbelief. A thin, high whine slipped out of him, almost a whimper. She crouched slowly, the sharpness gone from her face entirely, replaced by something warmer. She traced 2 fingers along a jagged scar across his muzzle. "Hey, old man," she said softly. Ghost rolled onto his back, exposing his belly, tail thumping the dirt hard enough to raise dust. Behind the fence, 3 operators stood with their mouths open, frozen solid. She looked up, found Tully's eyes through the wire. "Like I was saying, Sergeant, he doesn't respect you, but he remembers who raised him." The gate groaned open. Tully walked in slow this time, like he was approaching something live and unexploded. Whitfield and Doiron followed, eyes flicking between the woman and the dog, now nuzzling happily against her hand. "Who the hell are you?" Tully said, all the swagger gone out of his voice. "And what did you just say to him?" She reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out a worn rubber chew toy and tossed it. Ghost caught it clumsily and dropped to gnaw at it like the most ordinary house pet in the world. She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "Dr. Naomi Renauld. I run the Canine Behavioral Program out of Suffield's Research Division, the one that doesn't appear on your unit's org chart. You don't know me, Sergeant, because officially my program doesn't exist. Neither does this dog. Not the way you think you know him." Whitfield frowned. "We pulled his file this morning, KT7. It's all there. That file is a cover story," she said. "He wasn't trained through standard procurement. He's part of a closed program, single-hailer bonded asset, engineered for deep cover work where there's no radio contact, no backup, nothing but the dog and the operator, trusting each other completely." She paused. "He was bonded to exactly one person, Master Corporal Marak." Tully looked down at the dog, something working behind his eyes. "Single-hailer bonded. That means—" "It means," she said, her voice softening with something that sounded almost like grief, "that when Marak's vitals flatlined during that collapse, Ghost didn't just lose a handler. He lost the only frame of reference he had for the world. His training has a failsafe built in for exactly that. When the bond breaks catastrophically, he defaults to treating every unfamiliar handler as a threat trying to dominate him. You used choke corrections and shock collars to force him back into line. To a dog built the way he's built, that's not discipline, that's an act of war." Doiron, still rubbing his shoulder, spoke up. "But why now? Why'd nobody flag this months ago, when Marak died? Because the program that built him sits under a classification most people on this base have never heard the name of," she said evenly. "Information doesn't move fast through walls like that. I only got the notification 3 days ago that he was scheduled for termination. I drove through the night to get here in time." Before anyone could push further, the sound of tires on gravel cut across the yard. A dark green pickup skidded to a stop outside the fence, and Major Owen Castellane stepped out, the base's operations commander, a man known across Suffield for treating every decision like a line item to be closed out. Right now his face was a wall of barely contained fury. He marched to the fence, Sergeant Tully, I gave a direct order to euthanize that animal at 1700 hours. I'm told a civilian is interfering with that order. Major Castellane, she said, stepping toward the fence and leaving Ghost in a perfect down with one flick of her wrist. Dr. Naomi Renauld, DRDC. I have override authority over the disposition of any asset from my program. Castellane looked her up and down, unimpressed. I don't care whose authority you're carrying, Doctor. That dog put 2 of my men in the infirmary this week. He's done. He's highly deployable, she said, her calm hardening into something with an edge to it. He's rejecting handling that doesn't meet the standard he was built for. The insult landed and sat there, heavy. Tully's jaw flexed, but somewhere underneath the bruised ego, he already knew she was right. Castellane's eyes narrowed. Tonight, 2100 hours, we run a live scenario through the shoot house. Full blackout, hostage rescue, opposing force in padded suits. If that dog breaks protocol once, barks when he shouldn't, misses a threat, touches a hostage, I end this myself. Understood, she said, without a second of hesitation. Tully looked at her. Who's handling him? Nobody on this base is cleared for whatever protocol you just described. I am, she said, turning to look at Ghost, who was watching her with an intensity that hadn't existed in him an hour earlier. By 2045, the shoot house at the edge of the Suffield Range, a sprawling maze of plywood and concrete built to mimic a built-up compound, sat in total darkness. The air smelled like cordite and cold concrete. Up on the observation catwalk, Castellane, Tully, and a dozen skeptical operators stood with night vision raised, watching the maze below glow in flat green light. At the breach point, Naomi looked nothing like the woman who'd walked into the kennel yard that afternoon. She wore a plate carrier over dark fatigues, a helmet rigged with panoramic night vision, a suppressed carbine loaded with simulation rounds slung across her chest. Beside her, Ghost wore a tactical harness fitted with a silent infrared strobe, utterly still, eyes locked on the door ahead. Comms check, Castellane's voice crackled in her ear. 3 hostages, 5 hostiles, 10 minutes. Clock starts on breach. She didn't answer the radio. She rested a hand flat against Ghost's ribs, feeling his heartbeat, slow, even, then tapped his harness twice. Silent breach. He moved without a sound, pressing his nose to the gap under the door, holding there 2 full seconds before looking back and nudging her leg. Hostile, right side, immediate. She eased the door open, sliced the angle, fired twice. The instructor inside dropped his weapon, raising his hands. Up on the catwalk, Whitfield leaned toward Tully. He cleared the funnel before she even opened that door. They moved through the structure like something rehearsed 1,000 times, no verbal commands, just hand signals and a soft ultrasonic click from a device on her wrist. Ghost found 2 more hostiles in the kitchen and a back room, located both hostages, and placed himself bodily between the role players and the doorway until she gave the all clear. Castellane wasn't done testing her. Phase 2, he ordered into the radio. Go off script. On the 2nd floor, in a narrow hallway choked with debris, a flashbang dropped from above and detonated. The walls shook. In any standard scenario, that kind of blast sends a dog into a panic spiral. Ghost didn't even flinch. He pivoted immediately, checking her blind spot. A heavyset instructor in padded armor dropped through a hidden trapdoor behind her, weapon raised. She was still blinking the flash out of her vision when 90 pounds of dog came off the floor and hit him center mass, slamming him into the wall. On the catwalk, Castellane gripped the rail. He's going to maul him. Kill the lights. Stop the... Wait, Tully said, staring hard through his goggles. Look. Ghost had the instructor pinned, jaws locked around his padded forearm, holding the weapon immobile without breaking skin. Exact, controlled, textbook restraint. He held until she turned, saw the threat neutralized and tapped her leg twice. He released instantly, backed off 2 paces and sat. The instructor lay there a second, laughing weakly under his breath. Jesus, good boy, damn good boy, target secured, she said into the radio. Structure clear. The lights came up, hard and white. 10 minutes later, she walked Ghost out into the cold night air, where Castellane, Tully, and the rest of the section stood waiting in silence. Not mockery this time, just the particular quiet that comes after watching something you didn't think was possible. Castellane stepped forward, looked at the dog sitting calm and steady at her side, then at her. "I've run special operations for 19 years, Doctor. I've worked with the best handlers this country has. I have never seen a unit move like that." He pulled a folded order from his jacket and tore it in half. "He stays," Castellan said quietly. "One question. If he's bonded to Marak, how did you just get him to run a flawless op for you?" She looked down, scratching gently behind Ghost's ears. "Because I never tried to replace Marak," she said. "I bred him. I raised him as a pup before he ever had a handler's name. He knows my voice before he ever knew anyone else's. Tonight wasn't a handler running an asset. It was family finishing a job that started a long time before any of you ever met him." Tully stepped out from the group, walked up and held out his hand. "Doctor, if your program ever needs field testing up here again, this section's at your disposal." She shook it, a small, tired smile breaking through. At her feet, Ghost let out a long, contented breath, watching the men around him, not as threats anymore, but as something closer to home. The dog they'd called broken had never been broken at all. He'd just been waiting for the one voice that remembered who he really was, long before any of them did.